scripture from today is from Mark chapter 6, verse 45 through 46, then 53 through 56. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side to Bethsaida. While he dismissed the crowd, after saying farewell to them, he went up on the mountain to pray. When they had crossed over, they came to a land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about the whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed.
As we've said, that one of our values as a congregation is to seek to be lifelong learners. It's one of the reasons that phrase is in our vision statement, that we learning to be more like Jesus, that it's active. It's an active verb there. It's a lifelong pursuit. One of the ways we strive to live that out is by being curious about the text. Right? To not assume that we know exactly what's going on in the text, whatever text we read, whatever scripture is ours for the day, to not assume that just because we've read it a number of times before that we know exactly what it's about. Now it's easy to do, I think, or easier to do in a text like we have today, which mentions a few places. So I don't know about you, but if I don't look that up, I don't immediately know exactly where they're talking. Right? As I said before, it could just as easily be Themyscira or Mordor or Gotham as anything that's what's in the text. Like, it could just be some made-up place. I don't know what they're talking about. It could be Alderaan for all I know. But that's not what it's about. Like, the actual places. And did you notice this? Things that we notice in the text that maybe it might be easy to miss. But it tells us that Jesus sent the disciples to go to the other side of the lake, and they were going to where? Anybody notice? Well, that's not where they were going to. They were going to Bethsaida. It's right there. You can cheat. It's all right. It's not cheating. It's making use of the resources available to you. Using the text that's in your bullet right in front of you. They're going to the other side. They're heading to Bethsaida. Bethsaida. You say Bethsaida. I said Bethsaida. Call the whole thing off. It's Bethsaida the point, but that's... Oh, that was terrible. Oh, I'm so sorry. That was awful. But it says a little bit later that they landed where? Gennesaret, right, exactly. But what in the world does that mean? Well, fortunately, we have some maps to help you figure that out. So, remember a few weeks ago, Jesus went home. Right, so that's in Nazareth, kind of in the left side of the screen there. Kind of a little south and a little west there, kind of left, middle left, see Nazareth. That was his home, that was where it happened, and where he went to talk to his folks in the hometown. And they were kind of like, isn't this little Jesus that we knew like years ago? Not so sure about this guy. And so he left. Right? He sent his disciples out to minister to folks, and then they made their way toward the Sea of Galilee. And 2 weeks ago, we met Jesus and the disciples as they were talking to multitudes, thousands of folks, and they had a meal together. And our text says, immediately, this picks up right after that, immediately, Jesus sent the disciples in the boat to the other side. So imagine that they're probably, if you're in Nazareth and you're making your way toward the Sea of Galilee, you're probably somewhere in the southwest side of the Sea of Galilee. And I don't know if you can see it, but Bethsaida is kind of diagonal across to the top, the north, just a little northeast, the very top there. But they end up, it says they're going to Bethsaida, but they end up in Gennesaret. Okay, it's a little hard to see, so we've got a little closer up view here. Bethsaida's in the almost straight north, just a little bit to the east side, and Gennesaret's way over here to the left. It's about 5 or 6 miles off. Why would the text include that? Why does that happen? What's that supposed to mean? Now, friends, I am not a boat guy. Okay, my father-in-law had a pontoon boat. The only thing I've ever done is I've done multiple, times in the boundary waters on a canoe, and I'm pretty okay on a kayak, and I'm real good on a canoe, especially portaging it and whatever. But I don't have much experience with actual boats. So some of you might know this stuff better than I. But how often are you going to end up in a place that's 6 miles away from where you meant to go? What is going on with that? It's one of the nuggets that stands out. They're not where they wanted to go. So what do they do about that? Well, what do you do when you end up in a place where you didn't intend to go? Well, I think we can take our cue from the text, from Jesus and the disciples, where as soon as they got out of the boat and the people rushed to them and they saw them and said, "Ooh, you guys are from Gennesaret. That's not where we wanted to be. Sorry. We're going to scurry on out of here. We need to go somewhere else." And they jump back in the boat and paddle as quick as they can back over to Bethsaida. Is that what happened? No, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. They said, I don't know why they ended up in a place where they didn't need to go, but as soon as they got out of the boat, people rushed to them. People needing some healing. And what did they do? Ministry. They healed them. They spoke to them. They worked with them. They taught them. They healed them. It didn't matter that they weren't in the place they intended to go. Where they were people who needed healing. And so they had compassion on them, and they healed them. They were not where they wanted to be, but they were in a place where they were needed. They weren't where they wanted to be, but they were in a place where they were needed. Now, I think there's a way to see that this is a pattern that's happening in this part of Mark's gospel. Right? Remember, as we said back then, they were in Nazareth. They wanted to be there, but people didn't want them there, so they were trying to get away. Right? They were trying to get away. Jesus sent all the people out. They needed some rest. You ever needed some rest? They needed some rest. But what happened? We read this 2 weeks ago. The people kept finding them. Wherever they went, they kept finding them. They couldn't hide anywhere. People kept finding them and needing something from them. And they had compassion. And they healed them. And worked with them. And they fed them. Right? They intended to go somewhere by themselves to have a nice, quiet meal. Haven't you ever wanted to have a nice, quiet meal by yourself sometimes? People kept finding them. And instead of being upset about that, they expanded the table enough to feed thousands. It wasn't where they intended to go. It wasn't what they intended to do. But when they're in that moment, people were in need and they responded to that need. Friends, maybe you're at a point in your life where you're not where you thought you would be. As an individual, as a family, maybe as a congregation. It's been a long journey to get to this physical place. Maybe it hasn't gone exactly how you wanted. Maybe this isn't exactly the way you envisioned it. Maybe we're not in this place that you intended for us to be. One of the nuggets that I hear in this text today is that wherever we are, whether we intended to or not, there's ministry to be done. There are folks who need compassion, and we can reach out and supply that. Now, I think there's an important distinction to be made between healing and curing. There's not a lot that we are able to cure, but we can offer healing. With a sympathetic ear, a piece of bread, a meal. Later tonight, we have a team of folks that will be serving at daybreak. Some neighbors who are experiencing homelessness will be fed and will receive some companionship tonight. I don't know if that team, the folks I know they intend to be there because they're going there, but I don't know if you'd asked them a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago if that's where they intended to be on July 28th, 2024, but that's where they will be tonight. And that's the work they will do. That work of compassion. Maybe we aren't where you thought we would be, but perhaps we are right where we need to be. Perhaps we're right where God needs us to be. Well, let's be honest, it's disorienting to end up in the wrong place. Remember days way back before we all had, the knowledge of the universe on our phones in our pockets? They would tell us exactly which turns to make to get to a place where we're going. And sometimes we had to use a map, or sometimes we had to use our intuition. You ever think you know where you're going and you end up you didn't know, finds out you didn't know where you were going? Yeah. It's disorienting to end up in the wrong place, where you didn't intend to be. And that brings me to the second nugget I noticed in this text this week. It said, when they crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. Why that extra little bit? Like, who cares? Who cares how they landed the boat? Right? We already know that they were aiming for Bethsaida and they ended up in Gennesaret. And then the text says they landed at Gennesaret, and instead of saying, well, they got out and they met the people, whatever, it takes a moment. Mark takes a moment to say they moored the boat. That's the kind of thing, as lifelong learners, being surprised by the text, that's the kind of thing that should get our antennas moving a little bit. Like, why that little extra bit? Mark is the shortest of our Gospels. The action's always on the move. Immediately, the word immediately appears at least a dozen times in the text. One thing happens right after the other, right after the other. We just saw it. Right? They just got done feeding the 5,000 people, and instead of taking a nice big deep breath, the text says Jesus immediately sent them out into the boat. Action is always on the move in the Gospel of Mark. And yet, he takes a moment to say, they landed at Gennesaret, and they moored the boat. Like I said, I'm not really a boat guy. You on a canoe, and you don't moor a canoe, right? Or a kayak. You just pull it up to the shore and you drag the thing out. So I had to look it up. I mean, I thought I had an idea of what it meant to moor the boat. But mooring, I like this. Mooring refers to lassoing, tethering, tying, or otherwise securing your boat to a fixed object, rather than dropping anchor to secure your vessel wherever you fancy. Mooring your boat is done in a few different ways and might take some trial and error until you perfect this skill. And of course, mooring as a verb is defined as an established practice or a stabilizing influence. They moored the boat. They weren't where they intended to be, so they moored the boat. They secured themselves to a fixed object, to a stabilizing influence. Beloved, I don't think Mark is talking entirely about boats here. Remember that the text is always operating on at least three levels. Right? There's a story that's being told, the one that we've been reading. Oh, Jesus went to Nazareth. Oh, Jesus and the disciples fed some 5,000 people. Oh, they're in a boat and trying to cross a lake. It's operating on that story level, right? The kind of the ground level. It's also operating on the level of Mark, the gospel writer, talking to his community, sharing the story in this particular way for a particular group of folks that he knew that we don't necessarily have access to. You kind of to reverse engineer it, but we don't know exactly to whom he's writing. And then, of course, there's us today, reading these texts all these millennia later, and what it does to and for and with us. So always on those three levels. It seems to me, Mark is saying to his community, wherever you end up, find that fixed object. Moor your boat. If you're somewhere you didn't intend to be, moor your metaphorical boat. And to what does Mark suggest we moor it? Come on, folks, this is easy level, like Sunday school answer. What's the number one answer to all the questions we ask in church? Jesus, of course, yes! Jesus, hope, and prayer. Like, these are all of your standard answers, right? Like, any one of us, you'll hardly go wrong if you answer the question, Jesus, or hope, or prayer. Why does Mark include this little nugget? If not to remind us that we need to practice connecting to a stabilizing force in our life. Every single one of us at some point will end up in a place we didn't intend to be, and we're going to need a stabilizing influence. And I like the bit about it takes some experimenting too. It takes some practice. We've been talking for weeks now about 1,000 different experiments about how we're going to be the people that God calls us to be in this place. 1,000 experiments about how we're going to offer some healing and some hope for folks in this community. One of those experiments, any experiment, whether it works or it doesn't work in the way you think, that's data, right? Like, you get some data from that, no matter how the experiment turns out. Well, one of those experiments produced some pretty good data this week. We've been doing the Skeptic Circle for a few months now, and we had, for the first time this past week, we had somebody from the community find us and join us. Somebody said they grew up in a particular version of Christianity, one that they came to see. Some woman said that she came to see that the version of Christianity that she grew up in didn't really have very nice things to say about women. And for sure didn't have very nice things to say or do about her LGBT friends. And her job put her in a position where she was constantly meeting people on their worst day. And tragically, meeting people sometimes on their very last day. And that tore at her soul. Somebody who needs a word of hope, a word of healing. And I can't say for sure that our hour and a half together did that, but it reminds us that there are people right here in Lenuta, in our community, that need some healing. That feel like they're in a place they didn't intend to be and need something to moor their boat to. Need that stabilizing influence. Need help establishing a practice of doing that. So friends, if you're feeling like you're in the wrong place, if you feel like you didn't end up where you intended or where you wanted to be, the good news of this text today is you're in good company. That's exactly what happened to the disciples, and they literally had Jesus in the boat with them. And they still ended up in a place they didn't intend. So let's commit to keep experimenting. Let's continue to keep experimenting in ways we can moor ourselves to Jesus and offer healing and hope in the community. Daybreak is one. Experiments like this Skeptic Circle is another. In the coming weeks, and sometime in the next month or so, I'm going to invite us to consider providing an offering of letters. Something new. There'll be more on that in coming weeks, but a different way to offer healing on a grander scale. That's just a little teaser. Just enough to hopefully whet your appetite and make you tinge in your brain to go, what's that? What's he possibly talking about? But I don't give you the answer today. You've got to come back and keep paying attention to get that answer. It's the point of a teaser. But beloved, wherever you're at in your life, personally, as family, as a congregation, let us stay moored to Jesus and have compassion for ourselves and for our neighbors, so that wherever, if we can do that, if we can continue to experiment with doing that, well, the words of Julian of Norwich come to mind then. No matter where we are, if we're moored to Jesus, all will be well, all will be well, all manner of things will be well. Will you continue to experiment with us as we moor ourselves to the stabilizing influence of Jesus the Christ? Are you with me? Amen. May it be so.